The sky churned, a canvas of bruised purple and angry gray. Wind howled through concrete canyons, whipping debris into a frenzy. Rain, relentless and cold, lashed down with the fury of 1,000 waterfalls. This was not just another storm, it was the deluge, the day the oceans rose in anger. Coastal cities, once symbols of human achievement, began to disappear beneath the waves. The world watched in horror as familiar landmarks became submerged, swallowed by the rising tide. The airwaves crackled with static, punctuated by panicked voices. Reports flooded in from every corner of the globe, each more dire than the last. Mumbai, a bustling metropolis of millions, was now an archipelago of concrete islands. New York City, the city that never sleeps, was being lulled into a watery slumber. The images were surreal, apocalyptic. This wasn't a Hollywood blockbuster, it was our reality, a terrifying glimpse into a future we had been warned about but chose to ignore. Fear, raw and primal, gripped the collective heart of humanity. Section 2. The Science of Catastrophe. A timeline ignored. The seeds of this catastrophe were sown long ago, sown by our own hands. For decades, scientists had warned us about the consequences of our actions, about the invisible threat that loomed large: climate change. The Earth's temperature was rising, a fever brought on by our insatiable appetite for fossil fuels. The polar ice caps, once thought eternal, were melting at an alarming rate, pouring trillions of gallons of water into the oceans. Reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, once relegated to dusty shelves, became chilling prophecies. They spoke of extreme weather events, of rising sea levels, of mass extinctions. Yet these warnings were often met with skepticism, denial, and outright hostility. The fossil fuel industry, with its immense wealth and influence, funded campaigns to discredit the science, to sow doubt in the minds of the public. Politicians, beholden to corporate interests, prioritized short-term economic gain over the long-term health of the planet. The consequences of inaction, once theoretical, were now playing out in terrifying detail on the global stage. Section 3. Walls of Indifference, Nations Divided. As the waters rose, so too did the walls. Fear and desperation proved to be fertile ground for old prejudices to resurface. National borders, once lines on a map, transformed into concrete barriers, topped with barbed wire and manned by armed guards. The world, already fractured by political and economic divisions, retreated further into itself. The wealthy nations, responsible for the lion's share of historical emissions, were quick to secure their own borders, leaving the most vulnerable to fend for themselves. The Paris Agreement, a beacon of hope in the fight against climate change, lay in tatters, a casualty of short-sighted nationalism and political expediency. The promise of global cooperation, of shared responsibility, evaporated in the face of existential threat. The developing world, least equipped to deal with the impacts of climate change, bore the brunt of the crisis. Droughts and floods ravaged crops, displacing millions and exacerbating existing inequalities. The images of desperate climate refugees, huddled in makeshift camps, became a haunting symbol of our collective failure. These were not just statistics, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were human beings, victims of a crisis they did little to create. Section 4. The Great Upheaval, Migration and Conflict. The rising tides triggered the largest mass migration in human history. Millions, displaced by floods, droughts, and famines, were forced to flee their homes, becoming climate refugees in a world that no longer had space for them. The lucky ones found refuge in overcrowded camps, living in squalor and uncertainty. Others were not so fortunate, perishing on perilous journeys across treacherous seas or hostile borders. The sheer scale of the displacement overwhelmed governments and aid organizations. Resources, already stretched thin, were unable to meet the growing needs of the displaced millions. Tensions flared as competition for dwindling resources intensified, both within and between nations. Conflicts, fueled by desperation and fear, erupted with increasing frequency. Water wars, once the stuff of dystopian fiction, became a grim reality. The social fabric, already frayed by economic inequality and political polarization, began to unravel. Trust, the bedrock of any functioning society, eroded, replaced by suspicion and fear. Section 5. Nature's fury unleashed, wildfires and dust bowls. As if the rising seas weren't enough, the land itself seemed to rise up in revolt. Wildfires, fueled by drought and extreme heat, raged across continents, turning once lush forests into smoldering wastelands. The air grew thick with smoke, choking the life out of cities thousands of miles away. Fertile lands, once breadbaskets of civilization, transformed into arid dust bowls, victims of prolonged droughts and unsustainable agricultural practices. The delicate balance of ecosystems, carefully calibrated over millennia, was thrown into disarray. Species struggled to adapt, to survive in a world that was changing faster than ever before. The consequences of our inaction were no longer abstract projections, confined to scientific reports and academic journals. They were real, tangible, and terrifyingly immediate. Section 6. Drowning Cities, a Coastal Requiem. The ocean, once a source of life and sustenance, had become a relentless force of destruction. Coastal cities, once vibrant hubs of commerce and culture, were slowly being consumed by the sea. The iconic skylines of Miami, Shanghai, and London, symbols of human ambition and ingenuity, were now disappearing beneath the waves, monuments to our hubris. The relentless advance of the ocean was a stark reminder of the power of nature, a force far greater than ourselves. Millions were displaced, their homes and livelihoods swallowed by the rising tide. The lucky ones escaped with their lives, forced to rebuild their lives from scratch. Others were not so fortunate, their stories washed away by the relentless waves. The loss of these coastal cities was not just a physical loss, but a cultural and historical tragedy. Centuries of human history of art, architecture, and innovation were being erased, swallowed by the rising tide. Section 7. Echoes of Silence. The Sixth Extinction. The deluge did not discriminate. It affected all living things, not just humans. Forests, once teeming with life, fell silent as countless species succumbed to habitat loss, extreme temperatures, and changing weather patterns. Scientists warned of a sixth mass extinction, an event of unprecedented scale and severity. Species were disappearing at a rate not seen since the demise of the dinosaurs, their absence leaving gaping holes in the web of life. The loss of biodiversity was not just an environmental tragedy, it was a threat to our own survival. The echoes of silence, the absence of so many voices from the natural world, were a chilling reminder of what we stood to lose. Section 8. The Economics of Extinction, Profit over Planet. Even as the world burned and drowned, the engine of global capitalism continued to churn, its gears greased by the very fossil fuels that had brought us to this precipice. The pursuit of profit, the relentless drive for economic growth, had blinded us to the environmental consequences of our actions. We had become addicted to a system that prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability, a system that valued profit over the planet. The fossil fuel industry, with its immense wealth and influence, had spent decades downplaying the threat of climate change, sowing doubt and delaying action. The deluge had exposed the fundamental flaws in our economic system, a system that prioritized endless growth on a finite planet. Section 9. A Choice to Make, Greed or Survival. The deluge presented us with a stark choice: continue down the path of greed and destruction, or chart a new course, one that prioritized sustainability and justice. The old ways, the ways of unfettered capitalism and rampant consumerism, had brought us to the brink of collapse. It was time to embrace a new paradigm, one that recognized the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance of nature and the limits of our planet. We had the knowledge, the technology, and the resources to avert the worst impacts of climate change. What we lacked was the political will, the courage to challenge the status quo, to break free from the grip of the fossil fuel industry and embrace a just and sustainable future. The time for half measures, for incremental change, was over. Section 10. A Time to Act Towards a Sustainable Future. The deluge, in all its destructive fury, also carried a message of hope. It reminded us of the power of human resilience, our capacity for innovation, and our ability to come together in times of crisis. It was not too late to act, to avert the worst impacts of climate change and create a just and sustainable future for all. But action had to be swift, decisive, and on an unprecedented scale. We needed to transition away from fossil fuels and embrace renewable energy sources. Section 11. Our Shared Destiny, a Call for Global Unity. The deluge was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of our shared humanity and our interconnectedness with the natural world. It transcended borders, ideologies, and religions. It was a crisis that affected us all, and it demanded a collective response. It was time to put aside our differences and work together to build a more just and sustainable future. We needed to listen to the scientists, empower marginalized communities, and hold our leaders accountable. The fate of our planet, the future of our species, depended on it. The time to act is now.